All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's advisor webinar, Understanding and Utilizing the Men of Merit Standards. We're very pleased you're able to join us today, whether you are listening in to the live webinar or you're listening to this later at the time that works best for you. First, want to say thank you, as always, for your service to Delta Upsilon and to the individual chapters you advise. My name is Michelle Marchand. I serve DU as the Senior Director of Chapter Development, where I supervise our 7-member chapter development team. So these are our on-the-ground staff members that travel throughout the year visiting our 80 chapters and colonies. I also manage our advisor and volunteer training and development, and so I get to interact with all of our fantastic advisors, like all of you that are listening today, in this capacity. I've worked for DU since 2011, and I have about 11 years of experience in higher ed and fraternity and sorority life. I'd now like to turn it over to Dr. Aaron Clevenger to introduce himself as the chairman of the Men of Merit Committee.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, brothers. It's great to talk to you. I know many of you that are on the call, and I'm excited to be working with you and learning and sharing with you today. I am the Dean of International and Graduate Student Services at Embry-Riddle. I've worked for Embry-Riddle for 13 years. I've been a member of Delta Upsilon since 1992 and held a number of undergraduate positions as well as working on the staff, either with some of you on the call or right after some of you on the call. And I've been serving for the last 4 years on the International Board. So I'm excited to be here today and share some of our thoughts about this new exciting program.
Excellent. Thanks, Aaron. All right, so you all may be asking yourself, what brought about the Men of Merit Standards? Where did they come from? How do we get here? So I wanted to give you all a little bit of background on that. There's really 3 key factors that led to the creation of these standards a little over a year ago. And those 3 factors are the fraternity's strategic plan, the previous chapter health metrics that we had, and the fraternity's membership outcomes. So the first one, the strategic plan. Back in 2012, the fraternity's board of directors had identified 3 areas which to focus the 2012-2015 strategic plan on. One of those areas of focus was called consistency of the undergraduate brand. So in an effort to ensure the fraternity's chapters were providing a sound educational and developmental environment for its undergraduate members, regardless of which campus or university that they were at, the board identified a strategic priority to develop and implement a process where chapters were assessed, evaluated, and recertified on a consistent and recurring basis. So this strategic directive by the board is what really laid the groundwork for what would eventually become the Men of Merit Standards. The second factor that led to the creation of the Men of Merit Standards were the chapter health metrics. So as the strategic plan was being developed back in 2012, the fraternity was also moving to become a more data-driven organization. While things like membership size and loss prevention incidents, those have obviously always been tracked. But we didn't have enough data at the time to really say what exactly makes a good chapter or vice versa, what isn't a good chapter. And so IHQ staff, in conjunction with our host institutions, began compiling and analyzing data for each of our chapters on a number of different points, including things like membership size, but in comparison to campus fraternity average, educational program attendance, philanthropy donations, GPA compared to the campus fraternity average, and more. And so this information became known as the chapter health metrics and was shared with chapters for 3 years in the form of a chapter health report card. So the third factor that led to the standards being created were the fraternity's membership outcomes. So at the same time that the chapter health metrics were being developed, there was also the creation of articulated learning and development outcomes that demonstrated the value and growth of an undergraduate man due specifically to his membership in DU. So as you all know, with the spotlight on fraternities growing ever brighter, it had really become imperative in the higher education world to show, fraternities don't just say that they build better men, but we're actually able to demonstrate that the fraternity experience is instrumental in their growth and in their advancement and development. So the board and staff created the series of membership outcomes that are tied to each of the 4 founding principles. Those outcomes are then assessed on 3 different levels. Programmatically, which we see through DU's educational programs on a regional, national, and international scale. Individually, through the DU Membership Outcomes Assessment Survey, which our members took for the first time this past February. And then finally at the chapter level, which was identified to be through the success and strength of a chapter's performance in the Men of Merit program. So with the directive from the strategic plan, and then the development and assessment of those chapter health metrics and the membership outcomes, the Men of Merit standards were identified and created over the course of the 2014-2015 year in conjunction with board, staff, alumni, and undergraduate input. So the standards that are identified are really the key items or the short list per se, that if a chapter is attaining those at a reasonable level, at an expectation level, that's really what's going to help facilitate the ideal member experience that we are hoping our members and our chapters get through those membership outcomes. Now, there are 11 Men of Merit standards that each chapter is assessed on a yearly basis, and then they're placed into one of 3 levels for each of those standards. So they're either at the aspiration level, the expectation level, or the minimum level, or they could be noted as being below minimum. So available on the website, for those of you that haven't seen it, is a Men of Merit info guide. And that's basically a several-page document that gives you an overview, but also the details of the entire Men of Merit program, the membership outcomes, the specifics for each standard. And I'll also make sure that if you haven't seen that, we'll get a link to you emailed out when this webinar recording goes out as well. So I would now like to turn it back over to Aaron, who's going to talk to you about the Men of Merit Standards Committee.
Thank you, Michelle. So before I go into the committee specifically, I did want to say that there is an additional motivation, I think, that we explained to each of the chapters that we introduced this program to in the summer. And that was why the chapters were chosen and or why this exists in the first place. And that motivation for some of us on the board came about from the fact that we were all members of the Judicial Board, and we had been hearing a number of cases, and we were constantly talking with undergraduates, and we thought, wouldn't it be nice if we had some way of sharing some of these learnings before they got to a point where they were in a judicial situation? Why couldn't we have these standards out there and these conversations in a committee style where we can talk to chapters when they were at a point where, if given a bit of support, they could thrive, shine, win awards, or if not given that kind of focus, they're going to end up in judicial. So one of the motivators that also went with everything else Michelle talked about was wanting to catch these chapters that could shine before they went in an opposite direction. So let me talk to you for a moment about the committee composition. The committee is made up of alumni, undergraduate members, and we've also asked professionals in fraternity and sorority affairs to be members. So we have several non-members on the committee, and then we have staff from our executive staff. The committee that met with the students this summer that have been chosen thus far were generally a panel of 3 of our committee members from a variety of different people for each chapter. And we served and shared what our goals were and where we saw this responsibilities for the committee would be. And really the responsibilities for the committee are that we review all of the data that Michelle was talking about just a little while ago, the health metrics, the CEP scores, the strategic plan that the chapter might put together. We're looking at any improvement plans, any plans that come out of any of our Leadership Institute or our President's Academy, and a variety of other things, any reports that come out of in-person meetings, and we take all of that, meet with the students several times throughout the year. We met with them at LI. We're going to meet with them again relatively soon once recruitment has passed by phone. We'll meet with them again at our regional leadership academies, and we'll do follow-up during the year. And what we'll be meeting them about is the conversations around the chapter health metrics of where they could improve, where they're succeeding, what type of improvement plans they want to have so that they can meet the standards that have been set, and we'll do check-ins throughout the year on those improvement plans. So if, for instance, there is a standard particularly that they feel they're low on, we feel they're low on, we work together. Our team has given them some ideas. They've put together an improvement plan. We'll do a check-in throughout the year to see how they're progressing on that improvement plan. Michelle, any other thoughts on that?
No, I think that was a great summary, Aaron. Thank you.
Great.
So moving forward, as we mentioned, this past academic year, 15-16, was the first year of the full implementation of the standards. And so, what did we learn from it? What did we learn from the results? How is that going to impact this current academic year moving forward? So I'm going to give you a couple quick highlights. When it comes to strengths, one of the great things when looking at our data, almost all of our chapters are achieving an expectation or even aspiration level and at least one or two of the standards, if not more. The streamlined data that has been identified through this process is really allowing our staff and our volunteers to better service our chapters. So it's ensuring that when they're going out to visit, when they're talking to them on the phone, that they're able to really focus on the areas that a chapter most needs attention, but then also have that data to see, oh, let's celebrate this chapter's achievements in this area. Clearly they're doing something well here. And we've really taken the approach, especially with our chapter development staff, that every chapter has something they do well. And so how can we harness that success in one area and help them, multiply it across other areas of the chapter? And so that's really been one of the strengths coming out of the first year of this program. Some weaknesses that we noticed as we went along, there are two standards that the IHQ staff is unable to collect accurate data on ourselves. So we actually have to rely on the chapters to submit that information in order to be assessed. So those two standards are the service one and the advisory support, all of you. We're working to develop a better reporting and submission tool when it comes to service hours. So many of you know we are going to be launching a much needed brand new deltau.org website this fall. And so we are developing a more streamlined process through that new website whereby chapters can submit their service hours of their members and really do a better job at tracking it. Because that's just simply one of the data points that from an IHQ level we're not able to assess on our own. That really relies on the chapter submitting that information. Second to that, the advisory support standard, how we handled it this past year was we sent you all a form at the end of the academic year back in May and asked you to respond to a series of questions. And so, again, it's just a reporting mechanism that relies on people making sure that they get those items submitted. But I think the other challenge to that is really comes back to making sure our chapters have enough active advisors that are really engaged and involved in what's going on with the chapter. And so, we're working with some targeted groups to really increase their advisory involvement, but I will put it out to all of you that are listening to this today. If your advisory board would benefit from additional members, additional training, whatever it might be, please reach out to me and let me know so we can make sure you all are feeling as supported and as successful in your roles. The next piece I would touch on is some of our opportunities. So I think one of the greatest opportunities for Men of Merit is connected to knowledge and experience. So last year at this time, we were doing webinars to teach people about Men of Merit. Our undergraduates, our advisors, alumni had really just learned about the standards at the 2015 Leadership Institute. So here we are a year later, and we're at least reaching the point where more members have heard of the standards, they know a little bit about them, and they also have last year's results and their improvement plans to tangibly see and hold on to, and that really helps to demonstrate, what's being collected, how it's being used. Our chapter development directors, our leadership consultants, like I had mentioned, are referring to those standards in all of their chapter visits and all of their communication, and really working to make it become part of the DU language. Addition to that, there were some changes that were made from the 2015-2016 standards to this year. And so part of the assessment process, as Aaron was talking about the standards committee, they assessed not just what the chapters were doing, but what the actual standards were measuring, if they were measuring the right things, if we were collecting the right information. So between the feedback from that committee and the feedback from the fraternity's board of directors, but also feedback that we had heard from our chapters, from our undergraduates, from our advisors, several changes were made to the standards for this academic year. So the first of those changes was related to retention. Now you may remember last year we had 12 standards. This year we have 11. Part of that reason is that we removed the retention standard. So what we found over the past year is that obviously retention of members is very important to us. It's very important to track, but we currently don't have the right systems in place to assess retention as we should. So the previous standard really just focused on the retention of associate members through to initiation, but it failed to consider retention of members from initiation through to graduation, and even the impact of the fraternity experience on the graduation rate in 4 years, 5 years, or 6 years. So what we did is decided to, I say we, the committee and the board of directors, basically said, let's pause. Let's remove the retention standard for this year. Let's take a more thorough look at it and figure out what do we need to do to make sure we're collecting the right information in the right way so that we can assess it as we're hoping we can. The next change is related to program attendance. So this is a slight change in the aspiration level of the standard. To reach that level, to reach the aspiration level, chapters must have at least 15 members or 15% of the chapter, whichever is higher, attend DU educational programs over the course of the year. The previous percentage there was actually 25%, not 15. And that 25% was simply too high to really be attainable or realistic for some of our largest chapters. If you have chapters getting up to, that 200 member size, it just becomes a little unrealistic to think they could get 25% of their members to an educational program. So we reduced that slightly to try to make it a little bit more fair for some of our largest groups. And then additionally, the program attendance standards were revised to specifically state a specific number of attendees at the annual Leadership Institute. So at the aspiration level, you're sending at least 8 members to LI. At the expectation level, you're sending at least 4. And at the minimum level, you're sending at least 2, the 2 that you're already paying for through your chapter fees anyways. The third change is connected to the Associate Member Education Standard. So as you all know, we've just launched the new Associate Member Education Program this year after it spent last year in a pilot phase. And so this standard was revised to only have an expectation level. Basically, a chapter is either implementing the program this year or it's not. There's not yet a way for them to be reaching an aspiration level of that implementation or a minimum level. They're either doing it or they're not. And so that will likely be revised again as the program continues to develop. But for this year, you're either at an expectation level or you're not. And advisors, we will need you all to help verify your chapter's participation in that program by the end of the academic year. The fourth change is connected to loss prevention. So the percentages on the loss prevention standard were adjusted to directly reflect the loss prevention allocation model rather than taking the LP credits obtained out of 100%. Really, it was just a simple way to make the data process transfer easier between the allocation model and the standards. It didn't change the intent or the spirit of the previous standard. It just made it easier to understand that if I'm getting 60% of my LP credits, I don't have to then take 60 out of 65 to figure out is that 100% or 95%. It's just a simple transfer of the exact same percentages. And then finally, the fifth one is connected to advisory support. So this standard was revised to remove the one section that expected participation in the Advisors Academy every 2 to 4 years. So of course, we strongly encourage you all and in our chapters to support their advisors attending the Advisors Academy. It's also understand that not all advisors will be able to take time away to attend a 3-day program in person. And we don't want to hurt chapters or hold them accountable for an advisor's inability to participate in an in-person program when that advisor, could have participated in webinars throughout the year and was very actively engaged. So that changed there in the hope of making it a little bit more fair. So as I mentioned, the Metamerit info guide on the website lists each of the 11 standards so that you can see what each of them are and how that connects to each of the levels of achievement in it. And we'll get that sent out to you with the recording of this webinar. So I'm now going to turn it back over to Aaron to talk about how you can best support your chapters.
Thank you. So obviously, one of the key components to this entire plan, besides the standards themselves, is the improvement plan. And so one of the ways that you can engage your chapters in this, and one of the things that we obviously know about this particular standards committee, is that we are in no way a replacement for the on-ground chapter advisor. We're just one more tool for showing that we care and that we want to provide support. And so the improvement plans really are going to need to be a portion of the relationship that you all have with the chapter, whether that means that you sit with the chapter and help to create the improvement plan, or you serve as a sounding board for when they're creating the improvement plans, or you serve as another check-in on a weekly or monthly basis of how the chapter is doing with the improvement plan. The bottom line is that with more regular check-ins, the more success that we'll have. And this also, improvement plan might give you another way of engaging the chapter. And so we're hoping it will be an additional tool for you in your advising, which you will do obviously more closely than some of us will on the standards committee. We'll continue to use them as check-ins, as I said earlier, with our responsibility when we check in with them every LI, when we check with them by phone, and when staff members check in with them in person at RLAs. In addition to that, I think that you've probably received, or at least I know your chapter has received, an email recently about who your new IHQ staff liaison is, and for some it's probably a returning staff liaison. For others, it may be a new staff liaison. But that particular liaison will also have access to the improvement plans and will be yet one more check and balance for how the chapter is doing to improve on these particular standards. So ultimately what you'll see is that we're trying to make this pervasive. We're trying to show the chapters that that their well-being, their success, both on an individual basis and on a chapter basis, is what we most care about, that they have a successful chapter and a successful experience. And we believe that the minimum merit standards is an example of, or a show of, these successful chapters and successful experiences. And so that is why we think there should be so many check-ins and so many conversations about how they're utilizing their improvement plans. And I will tell you that we will probably get some wrong. The improvement plans won't be perfect the first time out the gate. And so while we're doing check-ins, we will adjust them, and we will see that the chapter has improved in one area and not so much in another, and so maybe we'll focus on another portion of the standards later on in the semester, later on in the summer, later on during the school year. So they are going to be adjustable, and they are going to be a living document as we go through and do these online, on the phone, and in-person checks. So I'm looking forward to this year as the chair, and available for feedback, and I think we're going to take questions here in a few minutes. But one thing I want this to be as transparent as possible and as useful to you as advisors, as useful as possible to the undergraduates in the chapter. And if you have suggestions, I'm always open to hear them.
Great, thanks so much, Aaron. Like you said, we are happy to answer any questions you all might have right now. The easiest way to do this is to type it in the question box or the chat box on that sidebar screen that you have. But if you think of something afterwards, certainly feel free to reach out to myself or Aaron. We are more than happy to answer questions and make sure you all feel comfortable with what the standards are, how you can be supporting your chapters to work through them. I think the other part I would add in here too is what we've tried to clarify with chapters is Men of Merit is not intended to be another thing on their plate that they have to do. 9 of the 11 standards are things that IHQ is able to collect all that information for. It's really based around, you know, what their membership is, how their recruiting is going, what their academics are. Are they completing CEP? Are they doing fundraising for GSI? Are they, what's their service hours? It's things that they're already doing. It's simply compiling that really into one location so that we're able to see that snapshot of what makes a chapter good, what are the things that our best chapters are doing, but then also, you know, like Aaron was saying, really be able to narrow in and focus on how we can best help them through those improvement plans, through the things that they need that extra little nudge or push from. I am not seeing any questions so far. Aaron, is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Just that as we did with the standards themselves, we are open to being as transparent as possible and hearing the advice on the committee structure, when it's best to follow up, when it's best to have these conversations. And like Michelle shared, there were changes to the standards themselves. So could be there changes to the Minimum Merit Standards Committee. So please, by all means, this is your committee and built to help your chapters. So Michelle would be a great contact, myself as well. We'd love to hear feedback. And if you have questions that are specific to your particular chapter that you don't feel are appropriate here, you can always send Michelle or I an email, and we'd be happy to get back to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Aaron. And everyone that's on the call today or listening to this webinar, thank you for joining us. I will send out the recording after later today along with that Metamerit info guide, so you can access that and see everything in person. I'll also send out information about our next advisor webinar at the beginning of October. So that is going to be on October 5th and Justin Kirk, our executive director, is going to be leading that one, talking about NIC 2.0 and DU's involvement in that. And so really what's going on in the larger interfraternal landscape and how that is impacting the fraternity.
And Michelle, I noticed that we do have one question.
Oh, sure.
And it was about one of the mentions that I had that the chapters should have already received notice of their chapter liaison, and that may not be the case from what I am seeing from this particular question. So could you address when that was supposed to have gone out? I know I saw it at least 2 weeks ago for my own, for Central Florida. I'm not sure if that's an ongoing process or if there are certain ones that aren't assigned yet.
Yeah, great question. So actually, all notices went out except a small handful of our chapters. We do have a new staff person who's starting next week as a chapter development director. And so if you haven't heard from your liaison, that new staff person is likely to be your liaison. But I will follow up. I see who that question's from, so I will follow up and make sure that is confirmed and all set.
And then the next question is there a minimum merit slide presentation that can be shown to our chapter members? Can I ask a follow-up question to that, Jamie? Is that, are you looking for a minimum merit committee, something like what you've just seen, or are you looking for a presentation that re-explains the standards? While he's typing, actually, Michelle, maybe you can answer both of those questions.
Yeah, sure. So we don't have a new revised one. We did create one last year with the original standards, but that's something that would certainly be easy to do, and we could send out a 15-minute, 20-minute recording about that, similar to what we did today, but more specifically focused on the 11 standards. I do think one of the best resources for our members too is that same info guide that we were plugging to you all, because that does break down all the information that they need to know about each standard, each level that goes into it. But great suggestion, Jamie, and we can certainly get something like that out in the next week or two.
Any other questions for us? I'll give you a second because I know typing in that little box is not so easy. All right, well, I don't see any more.
All right, well, thank you again, everyone. We will follow up with an email, but please, as always, let me or let Erin know if you have any questions, and we hope you all have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.